It's now my great honor to introduce our commencement speaker, Judge Paul Watford of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. Just like all of you will be in just a few minutes, Judge Watford is a proud graduate of the UCLA School of Law. A Southern California native, like Carlos, he came back to UCLA after earning his undergraduate degree from UC Berkeley, although Judge Watford earned his a few years earlier in 1989. While at UCLA Law, he stood out as a scholar and leader, respected by professors and peers alike. He was an editor of the UCLA Law Review and graduated Order of the Coif. He went on to acclaim as an attorney in government and private practice. But before that, he also clerked for fellow UCLA Law alum Judge Alex Kozinski on the Ninth Circuit. Then he went to clerk for U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. From 1997 to 2000, he was an assistant U.S. attorney here in Los Angeles, and he then focused on appellate litigation and became a partner at the LA office of Munger, Tolles & Olson, starting in 2001. A decade later, President Barack Obama nominated him to the Ninth Circuit, and he was confirmed by the Senate in 2012. Now, that's a pretty impressive resume, but Judge Watford has equally distinguished himself through his professionalism, his thoughtfulness, his humility, and his commitment to public service. Characters and principles that I'm not going to say that we created in him, but I'd like to think that his 3 years at UCLA contributed to in some small measure. His opinions for the Ninth Circuit have been a model of insight and reason, and he's extremely well regarded by his colleagues on the bench and his former colleagues in practice. And he's quietly volunteered significant energy to endeavors including Neighborhood Legal Services of Los Angeles County and UCLA Law's own Law Fellows program. A few years ago, when Judge Watford was widely talked about as a potential finalist for a nomination to the United States Supreme Court, Judge Kozinski, who, as we all know, has never sugarcoated anything in his entire life, said, "The bottom line about Judge Paul Watford is he is just really wonderful." Hear, hear. We are so proud to have him as a leading member of the UCLA law community and as the class of 2017's commencement speaker this afternoon. Graduates and guests, Judge Paul Watford.
Well, let me first say congratulations, class of 2017. It is an absolute privilege to be here with you this afternoon. And I have to say, I still remember the day 23 years ago when I sat in your shoes as a new graduate of this great law school. It remains today, to this day, one of the happiest and proudest days of my life, as I'm sure it will be for all of you. I also have to tell you, though, that back then when I was sitting in your shoes, I never once imagined that I would be invited back to address another graduating class of Bruins. So it's just truly an honor to be here. I know that in remarks like these, it's common to offer advice about how to succeed as a lawyer. And I'm going to follow that convention here, but I thought what I would do is offer maybe a couple of the lessons I've learned during my 5 years on the bench so far. In particular, I'd like to highlight, and I'm going to have to apologize up front for my voice. We have just finished a long calendar of oral arguments this week, so it's going to fade on me, I already know. But stick with me if you will. In particular, I'd like to highlight two of the qualities and habits of mind I've come to admire in my judicial colleagues, qualities that I found myself trying to emulate. I share them with you because I think you will need them to be successful as lawyers, and perhaps more broadly, to be good citizens as well. The first and most important quality, I think as you've already heard from the dean, is humility. Now, I know that we don't usually think of judges as being terribly humble people. Humility doesn't leap to mind when we think of lawyers either, for that matter. But there are many dimensions of humility, and the one I have in mind here is intellectual humility. So let me explain what I mean by that. One of the first things I learned early on as a judge is that you can't be any good at this job if you come in thinking that you're smarter than everyone else, that you've got all the right answers, and that anyone who disagrees with you must be a fool. And I assure you that's not a a recipe for success in any line of work. Most of the time, you won't be the smartest person in the room. You won't necessarily have all the right answers, and it certainly won't be the case that those who disagree with you are fools. That's not a bad thing, it's just the truth. And if you're willing to recognize that you need other people to help educate you, to provide perspectives that are different from your own, that's not a sign of weakness on your part. It's a sign of strength, because it shows that you're not so insecure in your own thinking that you're afraid of being challenged by those who may disagree with you, or by those who may have better ideas that deserve to win out at the end of the day. I think you will find in law and in life generally that those who speak with a lot of bluster, who come across as absolutely certain that everything they say is indisputably right, those are the folks who usually don't know what they're talking about. Or at least they're the ones who don't make the best decisions or arrive at the best solutions to problems. So let me give you an example from my first year on the bench. I sit, as probably most of you know, on a court with more than 40 other judges. And most of our cases are decided by panels of 3 judges. On our court, after we've heard oral arguments, as we did this week, and that's why my voice is fading, we have our conference right afterward, where we discuss and vote on the cases. We go around the table, and each judge gets to state his or her views about how the case should be decided. Early on, I thought whenever I was called upon to speak, I had better have everything figured out and know exactly where I stood so that I could convey to my colleagues with confidence that this is how this case should be decided. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I would say something like, well, this is an easy case. We obviously have to do thus and such, and here's why the losing side's counter-arguments are obviously wrong. I pretty quickly realized, though, that this is not the best way to convey one's views at conference. For one thing, it's much harder to change your position once you've dug in your heels like that. There were more than a few occasions when, if I spoke first, a more experienced colleague would follow and explain that actually he or she had a different take on the case. They might then proceed to raise a point I hadn't focused on, or perhaps explain why, from a practical standpoint, the rule I favored wouldn't work so well in the real world. Once that happens a few times, you start to appreciate the value of having a multi-member panel of judges, especially one composed of people with different backgrounds and life experiences. Because more than a few times, I found myself saying, you know, on reflection, he's right, or she's right. Or at the very least, they've raised a good point, one I hadn't fully considered and need to spend more time thinking through. During that first year, I started to notice that the judges I admired and respected the most, they didn't speak the way I did at conference. They were always careful to express their views in more tentative terms, suggesting that they were open to changing their minds if their colleagues had a different view. They did that, I think, because they genuinely wanted to invite a dialogue and hear what their colleagues had to say. They wanted to have their preliminary views about an issue tested and challenged, so they welcomed spirited debate. You can't be certain you're actually right about something if you're not willing to engage with those who hold different views. Only if you're exposed to the strongest arguments on the other side of an issue and can reason through why those arguments are wrong, can you be certain that the conclusion you've reached is the right one. I found that the give and take with my colleagues during conference is often the most valuable part of the decision-making process. We don't always end up agreeing with one another, but if there is disagreement, the exchange of views helps both sides to sharpen their thinking and very often to narrow the scope of disagreement. The quality of the decisions we ultimately reach is always improved if we've had a constructive dialogue with one another before casting our final votes. So, I can hear you thinking, fine, that's nice. Maybe it's a good thing for judges to be intellectually humble. But what does that have to do with being a good lawyer, you might ask? Unlike judges, lawyers have clients, and as lawyers, our job will be to vigorously advocate on our client's behalf. To be a good advocate, you might say, or you might ask, don't you always have to be certain that you're right, or at least pretend that you are? Those are fair questions, but what I would say in response is this. When we talk about intellectual humility, we're not talking about being mealy-mouthed and utterly lacking in conviction. Of course, there are principles that are right and worth fighting for. As judges, after all, we eventually have to make up our own minds, and having done so, we aren't shy about explaining why we think we're right. The same thing is true for lawyers. You'll need to decide what your client's ultimate objectives are and what the strategy should be to best help achieve them. And then you'll be charged with vigorously pursuing that strategy on your client's behalf. But the value of intellectual humility comes into play at multiple steps along the way. For example, on the front end, when deciding what your client's objectives should be and what the right strategy is for pursuing them, you'll need to be willing to recognize that you may not have all the answers, that you may need to get the input of those with greater expertise or who have different views from your own. That's why it is so important to surround yourself with people who don't think like you do, who come from different backgrounds and have different life experiences. Because if you do that, you'll be much more likely to be exposed to a range of views on a given issue. And in the process, the quality of the decisions you make as an advocate will be vastly improved. Intellectual humility can also help even after you've decided on your client's objectives and the best strategy for pursuing them. Once you've started practicing, you'll find that it's very easy to become convinced that your client's side absolutely has to be right, even in cases where you started out somewhat skeptical. It's just a natural part of the advocacy process. You become convinced that you figured out the right answers and that your opponents must be blind for disagreeing. The most effective advocates are able to resist that natural tendency. To be an effective advocate, you have to remain able to see things from both sides. You have to be able to step back and ask yourself, if someone were looking at this objectively, why would they think we're not right? Because remember, that's how the judges are looking at the case. We don't have an axe to grind. We're just trying to figure out the right answer. And so the advocate who's able to look at the case from the judge's vantage point and understand why the other side's arguments could, at first glance, be appealing or seem appealing, is always bound to be more effective in formulating persuasive responses. The other quality I will highlight about the judges I admire and respect the most is this. They can disagree with their colleagues passionately and on the most high-stakes issues, and yet still remain friends. That's something I got to see firsthand during both of my clerkships, first with Judge Kaczynski and then with Justice Ginsburg. As many of you know, Judge Kaczynski and Judge Reinhardt are very close friends on the Ninth Circuit, and Justice Ginsburg and Justice Scalia were equally close friends on the Supreme Court. Both pairs of judges could disagree with their colleagues as strenuously as any two judges can, but they never took any of their disagreements personally, and they never let those disagreements interfere with the warm relationship they shared both on and off the court. They had great respect for the other's intellect and integrity, and they knew that their colleagues were simply trying to get the law right, just as they were trying to do themselves. What I learned from Judge Kaczynski and Justice Ginsburg is that you don't have to demonize someone just because you disagree with them. It's possible for someone to still be a good person even if they hold views you disagree with, and indeed disagree with strongly. You have to be able to separate ideas from people. I like the way Justice Scalia put it once. He said, "I attack ideas. I don't attack people. And some very good people have some very bad ideas." I think that explains why he and Justice Ginsburg remained such good friends, notwithstanding how passionately the two of them disagreed at times over which one of them had the bad ideas. They were both able to see the good in each other, even if they didn't always see eye to eye on the important legal issues that came before the court. I hope that you have already come to this realization during your 3 years here at UCLA. I hope you have already formed friendships with fellow students or professors with whom you found yourself disagreeing. The ability to maintain collegial relationships with people you sometimes strongly disagree with will be vital to your success as lawyers. You will need that ability so that you can work as part of a team with colleagues who will challenge your thinking and bring to the table perspectives that are different from your own. And trust me, you will need it to deal with opposing counsel, who you will disagree with a lot. One thing that has always struck me about when I've heard tributes paid to the very best lawyers in our professions is that the lawyers who had opposed them in hard-fought cases would often say, "You know, we fought each other tooth and nail, but we were always collegial with one another, and afterward, we actually became friends." Even though you are joining a profession with thousands of other lawyers, The legal community is in many ways small and close-knit. You will find that wherever you practice and whatever your field, you will run into the same people again and again. Over time, you will develop a reputation, good or bad, based in part on your dealings with your adversaries. You'd be surprised at how the relationships you develop with opposing counsel can have either a very positive or very negative effect later in your career, depending on how you handle yourself. So I've mentioned a couple of the qualities that I've come to admire in the judges I've worked with, and I hope I've given you a little bit of a sense as to why those qualities will be useful to you in your capacity as lawyers as well. But let me leave you with one additional thought, which is that right now, more than ever, our country needs people who are open-minded, who are willing to listen to the views of others, and who are able to forge collegial relationships with people on the other side of the aisle. As all of us are aware, we live in very polarized times right now, where more and more people seem to be locked into their own narrow view of the world and are unwilling even to listen to, much less engage with, people who hold opposing points of view. By virtue of the training you've received in law school, you have the skills necessary to combat this trend of polarization. You've been trained to see both sides of an issue and to critically evaluate competing arguments. Hopefully you've come to realize that the only way to test the correctness of your own thinking is to actually engage with the arguments that cut in the opposite direction. And given your training as lawyers, you have the capacity to facilitate constructive dialogue among parties who may strongly disagree with one another, and perhaps in the process, help them to see that they share common ground. In that vein, I'm reminded of what one of our country's greatest judges, Learned Hand, said in a famous speech he gave in 1944 to a group of newly naturalized citizens. He said, "The spirit of liberty is the spirit which is not too sure that it is right." I like that quote because it captures the quality of intellectual humility and open-mindedness that Judge Hand brought to the job of judging. And I think those qualities are undoubtedly part of the reason he was an outstanding jurist. But Judge Hand wasn't speaking there of what you need to be a good judge. He was speaking about the importance of the citizenry as a whole being open-minded and willing to listen to the views of others if liberty is to be preserved. And he was warning against the danger of succumbing to the kind of dogmatic thinking that had taken hold in certain corners of the world back in the 1940s. I am incredibly optimistic that you all, as the younger generation of lawyers and future leaders of society, will find ways to bring us together rather than to drive us further and further apart into separate camps. I wish you the best of luck in the careers that lie ahead of you, and I hope that whatever path you decide to pursue, you will be as grateful as I am for the doors that your law degree has opened up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judge Watford. As a token of appreciation, the class of 2017 would like to present you with this UCLA Law sweatshirt.
Outstanding.
Our next speaker joined UCLA from New Jersey. After graduating from Wesleyan University with a bachelor's in psychology and theater. At UCLA, she served as co-chair of the South Asian Law Students Association and production editor of the UCLA Law Review. Please welcome our JD class speaker, Anika Amin.
Thanks, Carlos, and thank you, Judge Watford, for your thoughtful words. All right. Good afternoon, graduates, family, friends, faculty, staff, and undergrads passing by trying to figure out what could draw so many people to a field primarily used as a shortcut to the parking lot. Welcome. For those of you joining us from afar, welcome to sunny Southern California, where the beautiful weather is as constant as the mind-numbing traffic. If you flew in to be with us today, I'm really happy to see that you've survived what I endearingly refer to as the loop of existential crises at LAX. My fellow Angelinos know what I mean. You enter that circle fully accepting that this may be the time that perhaps you will not exit. That, like the circle of life, things begin and end at the same point. People who enter your life at one stage may leave you at a later terminal. And if you do not take control, you will watch life pass you by. Alternatively, if you take too much control, you'll watch an Enterprise bus run you over. It's an experience, and I'm thrilled to see you've made it here. To my fellow classmates, congratulations. Graduation is an occasion to celebrate our achievements and reflect on the chapter of our life that is coming to an end. It is a reminder for us to look back at where we were 3 years ago and how far we've come since. In preparing for today, I thought a little bit about how much I've grown during my time here at UCLA. 3 years ago, I would go to the library to do hours of work. Today, I would go to the library to finish a puzzle and diligently color a picture of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the presence of 1Ls doing hours of work. When I began law school, I could ride an elevator blissfully from one floor to the other. Now, thanks to Hummel, if an elevator door takes just 1 second too long to open, I'm not only convinced it's going to plummet and therefore begin considering whether my life has had a lasting impact on this world, but I'm also concurrently running through the claim that someone could bring against the elevator company for the negligent infliction of emotional distress of anyone in the vicinity. So shout out to all of our lawyering skills professors for that slice of lifelong trauma. So 3 years ago, if I heard someone call me Miss Amin, I would find it endearingly anachronistic. Now, if I hear someone call me Miss Amin, I look for the nearest exit because I didn't read the footnotes to the case, Professor, so no, I don't know what Greek myth the judge analogized to. I do know you saw me furiously avoiding eye contact, so this feels first personal. Before I started law school, my friends would complain if I bailed on our plans. Now they complain because I pointed out that since I did not technically, verbally, or textually commit, I could not have bailed on our plans, and it's probably their fault for relying on a promise that never really existed. These are just the facts. So much has changed. 3 years ago, the Blue Book was how I referred to Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix when I asked my mom to mail it to me. Now the Blue Book is the reason my optometrist is still in business because I'm staring at a Word document zoomed in at 400%, trying to figure out whether or not a comma is italicized. I mean, sometimes it feels like I'm not even the same person who went through 1L just 2 years ago. I once attended class as a 1L with a broken foot and 101-degree fever. I couldn't fathom missing a lecture. To contrast, last month, I missed 2 days of class in the same week to go to Disneyland. So I'm sorry, Professor. And while while I use that term in the apology, it's directed to every single one of my 2L and 3L professors. And I won't name any names because it's entirely plausible that they don't remember me ever taking that class. And now is not the time to correct that. You can look for their names in the second edition of this speech. It'll come out tomorrow, but cost $300 more, and that will be the only change. But beyond the trauma and newly impaired social skills, the past 3 years have given me the privilege of being your classmate. On our very first day of law school, we were welcomed in the courtyard by Dean Moran, who listed the many astounding accomplishments various members of this class achieved before beginning their legal career. Among those she listed were a Navy SEAL, a model who walked at Fashion Week in Milan, a congressional aide, and a Miss America contestant. I remember being blown away by how many walks of life my new classmates came from and how accomplished many of them already were. I was excited to see where they'd go, and I was not disappointed. In just 3 years, members of this class have fought for the education rights of youth in the juvenile justice system, worked on multi-million-dollar productions for some of the largest entertainment companies in the world, helped draft briefs on the merits for 2 Supreme Court cases, one of which was decided in their client's favor just a few weeks ago. Speaking of Supreme Court, this class helped beat our mortal enemies over at USC Law 3 years in a row in the annual UCLA USC Supreme Court basketball game. Okay, we're still nerds. Some of us provided legal services to homeless veterans and immigrants who were victims of domestic abuse through the El Centro legal clinics. Others received awards for their performance at national mock trial and transactional law competitions. And many of us united to put our limited legal experience to work as legal observers and research volunteers with various groups working to protect individuals affected by the travel ban earlier this year. So it's safe to say we've capitalized on our time here at UCLA Law. We have been developing the skills, both inside and out of the classroom, to prepare us for our journeys ahead. We've learned to analyze a problem, consider both sides of an argument, make a decision, and reason effectively to best serve the interests of our clients. And some of us, as I noted earlier, have already had the opportunity to employ these skills for clients in a courtroom or through written advocacy. Most of us will be given that opportunity once we begin our careers later this year. And with that opportunity, we will carry the formidable burden of practicing law, and many will use the law to pursue justice. Someday, the decisions we make may effectuate change and affect people in integral ways. We will have the distinct honor of being called upon to serve others. People will turn to the law and to us as lawyers in times of need, as many recently have. I have to admit, I didn't grow up really understanding what the law was. I'm the first person in my family to attend law school, so it was an abstract concept I took for granted because I could. Because I was born in this country to two immigrants who traveled from Bangladesh in search of a future where they wouldn't be limited by class, gender, or family history, and worked hard to ensure that my sister and I had every experience that our peers, whose families had been here for many generations, had. I didn't realize how prevalent the law was in my life. I didn't see how the principles of justice, which serve as the foundation of our legal system, are what drew my parents to this country and allowed them to dare to dream about the unlimited future potential they could provide their daughters. But I do see it now. And I stand before you with pride, knowing that I will embark on a career that will uphold those principles and allow other parents to dream that dream. To my fellow graduates, I'm hardly in a position to offer you advice because most of the time, I literally and figuratively look up to you. So consider this some food for thought. Let these principles, the ones that you've undoubtedly learned here, the ideals that our legal system was founded upon, guide you. Channel the drive that led men and women for centuries to strive to form a more perfect union. And consider what that means, more perfect. This phrase has always stuck out to me because for something to be perfect, it, according to Merriam-Webster, corresponds to an ideal standard, or as good as it is possible to be. For something to then be more perfect, you'd have to create something that doesn't even exist. So don't let any existing standard of perfection define your potential. When you've written your best, write better. When you've worked your hardest, work harder. Whatever you do, find your finish line and push it farther. See something perfect and make it more. I'm probably not alone in wanting to thank some people who helped us find our finish lines here today. To our professors for inspiring us to always seek more answers. To Tony, Dean Scavalletto, and the administration for protecting our emotional health and tirelessly supporting our endeavors both in and out of the classroom. To Dean Mnookin for your dedicated leadership and many happy hours. To Section 5-6 for taking our Word of the Day games just as seriously as our daily lessons. And to you, our family and friends, for being our constant sources of strength and clarity. And if you'll indulge me a moment, I want to thank my mother, who the moment I was born looked at my face, glowing with my first breaths of air, and said, "She will be a doctor." My mother has always guided me with her indefatigable work ethic and unlimited patience. She taught me to break boundary, and today my gratitude is boundless. But most importantly, to my fellow graduates. Thank you all for being my classmates, confidants, co-conspirators, and friends for the past 3 years. I'm honored to be standing here among you and look forward to continue being inspired by you for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Anika.